Hello, my name is Mary Stevens. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Projects at Herman Miller, and you are watching Student Perspective.
Hi, my name is Paige Bechtle, and today I'm speaking with Mary Stevens, Senior Vice President of Strategic Projects at Herman Miller, and this is a student's perspective. I'm so excited. If you like this conversation, please like, share, and comment below if you have any questions regarding this conversation. But thank you, Mary, for joining us. It's really such a pleasure. This is probably the widest reach range of someone will get within the furniture industry, and it's really exciting to have someone with such a large voice and really such an incredible background of history to be able to share with the students, just in any field really of design and creation and marketing. So thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
So today we'll start, I think, I just would like to share with everyone just a little bit more about your background in education, because I know you have a hefty undertaking of degrees too. So it's really impressive. And so coming from different backgrounds of business and where it all starts to interlay, I'd like to just hear about how that began and what made you proceed kind of in your education just starting out.
Well, first of all, my education was quite some time ago, as you might gather. I've been at Herman Miller for 36 years. But my educational background, my undergraduate degrees were in physics and mathematics. I have degrees in, and this was in Canada, I have degrees in education in physics and mathematics. And I have graduate degree in system science engineering. Mm-hmm. So that's what the formal education was. My pathway through, particularly, I worked in an industry before I came to Herman Miller, which was in the avionics industry, doing failure mode analysis on 727 and 737 aircraft. From that, I came to Herman Miller and have had a wonderful career doing multiple jobs, multiple areas of the company, actually 14 different areas of the company that eventually landed me where I am today. And through that path is my journey that I learned much more about design, what design means, and the whole product development process that really signifies who we are as a company.
Mm-hmm. And maybe this seems like a more blunt question now, but was you never expected to get into Herman Miller and just being within the design field in general, going through just your education process? That was never in the back.
No. In fact, to be really honest and truthful, when I came to Herman Miller, I actually didn't really know what they did, but they were looking for someone with a system science operations research background. Mm-hmm. In all honesty, and this has always been a joke, I actually, as I was being interviewed, I kind of tried to tell them that they weren't really looking for me because I didn't think my background was really what they were looking for at the company. Through somehow, I did get hired, and I originally was working in the IT department and did systems design work on a platform we had at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I didn't know anything. I really didn't know about design, and I didn't know the real power of design. Mm-hmm. I didn't even plan to stay because I felt like the company wasn't technical as what I was doing. As I said, I'd been working on some pretty sophisticated engineering kind of stuff, right? And it just didn't seem like this was going to be the place for me. Although it had a really, really good, Herman Miller had a wonderful reputation as a company in our area. And I'm not from this area. My husband knew about the company. I didn't. But as I got involved and I started to get one role that led to another role, I had what I love to describe as kind of a Christmas tree development. I went back and forth, kind of going up the tree a little bit, but continued to grow experience. My curiosity was always heightened. In that one role at the company led to another. And all along the journey, I kept learning more and more about really the heart of who we are as a company, what design means, and certainly the breadth of opportunity that provided, and certainly made us a very rich company. So yeah, it's been a journey. It doesn't make much sense looking back, but if you look forward going, every move that I made was a little bit broader, a little bit deeper in some areas, and it got me to this place.
As I think we've come to know, like from watching this webcast and from interviewing several people, sometimes the most organic paths and the ones that don't maybe make the most sense are sometimes the best experiences and the most surprising opportunities.
No, I think it's at the heart of what I think certainly what I look for when I'm hiring people. And I think what it is, I think it's when you're really curious about, for me, it was curiosity of how Herman Miller worked as a company. That curiosity just led me from one role to another role. Like, why is that important in what we're doing? And how does that feed into the next role? So curiosity.
So before we get too much into design and kind of your roles and how they began and kind of exploded in terms of where you existed now, I do want to ask about your location as well. So what was it like kind of like staying within this area? Like how has travel influenced you and getting your degree in Canada? Like what has that been like?
I got my first degree in Canada, first couple degrees in Canada because I'm Canadian. So I grew up in Canada. I moved to the United States for, actually because my husband is from Michigan. We actually had met traveling in Europe, and it made sense that we would sort of connect when we come back to the United States. We're centered, Herman Miller is centered located in Holland, Michigan, which is the west side of Michigan. But we are a global company. So one of the wonderful things that over the years for me, even though I've been headquartered here and work out of this location exclusively, I've actually traveled the globe multiple times, quite a bit, because my role has been a global role. And it's afforded me that opportunity, which has also been a wonderful part of my growth path of not only understanding how our business is connected around the globe, but on that particular note of design, how design gets expressed through the world, with the difference in culture and the difference in geography and everything else leads to the robust portfolio that we have as a company.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen a lot just in terms of the wording, global product development. And what does that mean to you? And is that just kind of, as you said, catering to these different people of different nationalities and their regions, or just what it's offered?
Yeah. Well, one of my role before what I currently have, I actually was I headed up global product development and advanced innovation for Herman Miller Group. And what that means is Herman Miller Group is actually 9 brands under the Herman Miller brand that we have. It's expanded over the last couple of years. And we sell both into the contract business, which means in common language, that pretty much means offices. So what people don't like to refer to as cubicles and desks and chairs, all of that in the contract business. But we also have a very robust retail consumer business. And we do that around the globe. So we have presence around the globe. That's evolved in my 36 years of being at Herman Miller. We were much more North America centric originally and pretty much contract, but we've expanded that. So the global part of what I do, or did basically, was to make sure that the products that we were producing answered the problems as expressed locally. And by locally means obviously the expression of what it means to have a really productive office in New York is quite different than what that means in Hong Kong, or what it means in London, or what it means in Bangalore. So it's always understanding what the needs are and how do we satisfy that as a global company. That's really what the essence of globalness, knowing what the problems are, and how you best solve those problems, even though we're global, but with a local, everything is local in the end.
Yeah. I think one of the most fascinating things to me is, I mean, also just the widespread reach of Herman Miller. I think anyone within, well, especially interior architecture, interior design, if you don't know the name, you probably shouldn't even be in the field. You don't.
We hope you know the name, yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. And so, what was it like starting 35 years ago? Was the size and scale just as impressive, or how has it grown and how exponentially has it grown?
That's actually a fascinating question. When I joined the company in 1984, we were, I think, $400 million company.
Mhm.
But here's the important thing: we were a Fortune 500 company.
Okay.
We have grown. We are now about a $2.3 billion company. If you're following the industry, you know that we've talked about and have suggested that we will combine with Knoll, which will make us the largest company in the industry. We'll be at about 3.6 billion, but we are no longer a Fortune 500 company. So I say that in that when I joined, we were much smaller, but we were a bigger player in North American companies. We are now much bigger, but a much smaller player compared to many of the businesses, particularly because of the tech businesses, et cetera, that fill that Fortune 500. We have changed a lot. And the growth has been broadening our market and broadening our global positioning, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And with that being said, I think this is more of just a personal curiosity standpoint. What is it like working with so many people and maybe not even obviously getting to meet everyone that you do work with, like those different ranges of whether different departments and different locations? What is that like?
I personally try to get to know as many of people as possible on my teams, extended teams. When I had the global development role, I had probably about 400 people around the globe.
Wow.
So I obviously made sure I know the people who were directly reported to me, but I actually made an effort to make and know people who weren't. And because I've been at the company so long, I tended to know who I didn't know, if you will. And it's always hard to keep in track, but it's a great question because I think it's one of the most important things ever. Early on, I don't know if this is of interest, but early on in my career, when I had broadening, when I was maybe had 100 or 150 people, and would take over a new area, because as I said, I've been in about 14 areas of the company. I used to do something that was very powerful, and I would have for everyone in my broad organization, and it was when we were less global, so this was easier to do when we were just North America centric. On the this is going to sound complicated. On the anniversary month of somebody coming to our company, because we actually celebrate when the anniversary of coming into the company. On the anniversary month, I would have an anniversary breakfast. Anybody in my broad organization who had an anniversary that month, I would invite to a breakfast. It was a light breakfast at our offices. And the important part was I got to see who they were and get to know them. So when I went into their department, I could recognize that they worked in the model shop or whatever that group was. So that was important. And then also they got to know each other, because often, right, you're in one part of my organization, but it's maybe different than another. So they all got to know each other. That was really, really powerful, and I loved it. I've done something similar to that globally by just having, random sort of coffee meetups. It's not as dynamic as being in a room, but I've always been pretty conscious of trying to at least know that I've at some level heard about someone. And in those breakfasts, by the way, we didn't really talk about work. I would give a quick little update, but we talked much more about, like, so what do you do outside of work? And again, so that everyone could meet each other, and I could certainly get a different insight.
Incredible. No, it's okay. I think it just speaks to the level of leadership that you've obviously supplied and why you've been so successful in your career as well. And when people respect the kind of necessity to communicate beyond work as well, it's something that's really important, I think, in terms of community core values that deal with being a part of a company. And it's something that probably gets lost along the way. And I think that's probably a miscommunication too with larger companies. And it's something that I guess I was just just had in mind, just in terms of when you imagine working for a larger company, sometimes I think it can come across as like a sterile environment where there is a lack of communication. But I think that's just a huge miscommunication.
I think my experience, I mean, we're big, but we're not as big as many companies, right?
Yeah.
My take is I think, again, if you have a curious mind to know what's going on, there are ways of finding out what's going on in other parts of the company. And there's always, no matter what the company is, there are cross-functional kinds of initiatives. Getting to know those are really important. Sorry.
That's okay. And it broadens your reach too. I think that's another thing I wanted to mention is that it allows you to continuously learn from other people, different backgrounds, and learn from different niches. It really can only
Right.
strengthen you. And I think you speak to that really
And
well too.
right. And it creates interest, right? The more you know about what's going on, the more you're sort of interested in finding out what that is.
Okay, but okay, so I wanted to jump on just continuing to talk about the length of the company and how long you've been there as well. You've obviously been able to see an incredible switch in probably consumerism as well as the way that you handle design. What has that been like, and what have you seen that shift in the market? And I know things are probably more changing, even more readily with COVID and initiatives like that. But in the past 30 years, what have been the main kind of adjustments you've seen within the industry and how you need to kind of market to the consumer?
Yeah, I think I'll sort of parse that out a little bit. In our particular industry, I think there are some themes that have never changed,
Mhm.
but how you address them have really changed.
Yeah.
So one of the ones, certainly in the interior space, the need for flexibility and agility has been expressed in the 36 years I've been there, but it means something different at different times,
Mhm.
right? And so much of what when contract customers are asking and talking about flexibility, it has a lot to do with technology,
Yeah.
right? So
Mhm.
I've lived through no personal. I came when we didn't really have personal computers. We didn't even have like big corner computers, right?
Yeah.
But so we started to have personal computers, which meant um, uh, a big whatever we used to call them, big computers. And so workstations had to be flexible enough to have a big corner work surface so that you could put that monitor on it and that heavy computer. And flexibility meant being able to do that work. Obviously, we come fast forward to now in which we have laptops that were so flexible that we were able to take our work and go home through COVID and not have to be in that workspace.
Mhm.
But there's a definition now of flexibility, agility, so that when you are in your workspace, you can do the kind of work you need to do, et cetera. So that I sort of say that as I said, many themes are the same. The
Yeah.
need for human contact to talk through things, to collaborate. We talk about collaboration a lot now in spaces, but we've always collaborated.
Yeah.
We always did it. We used to do it by going into a conference room and being really formal. We don't necessarily do it the same way now, but it's still a theme. So the changes that I've seen is how we answer the problem,
Mhm.
because a lot of the problems are the same problems. They're caused by different sort of things, and we have different tools to solve them by. I
Mhm.
can't imagine, quite honestly, if we had had to face COVID in the world back before we had, I'm looking at my laptop, before we had laptop computers. It's fascinating to know what the world would have been. We would have used different tools because
Yep.
we would have had to answer whatever that problem was. But
Mhm.
we just, so tools have really evolved.
Yeah.
Um, Design itself, I think, because we're a design-driven company, our DNA, our heart and soul, is design. So it's a harder question to answer. I would say that people are much more conscious of design than they once were.
Mhm.
So I think people can look at our product and make decisions about and critique on the design differently than they might have in the past.
Mhm.
But in terms of the actual strength and power of what design does, I don't think that's changed. I think if design, for us at least, if design is really about truly understanding and knowing what a problem is, so if you've really defined the problem well
Mhm.
and used good design or defined it well and then used really good design to solve it, the
Mhm.
basic principles are always the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
The aesthetic refinement changes on time,
Yeah.
you know, come and go, whether we like materials, whether we don't like certain materials, whether we're enamored by plastic, whether we don't like plastic. All of those things change, but the art and science of design doesn't change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the need to always innovate too. That's kind of at the core of that.
I like to say it's actually interesting. That question of innovation, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah.
Charles Eames, who was sort of really foundational to who we are as a company, basically had, I'll get this, I won't get the saying exactly the right saying, but you only innovate really, I think we should only innovate as a very last resort. By that, I mean, if you really, back to what I was saying, if you really understand a problem, you try to solve the problem, you only innovate when there's no other way to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
Which means it's a lot of times you have to innovate because actually you need an original and good solution. But yeah.
No, that's
a lot of companies talk about, and because that was a part of my role, was advanced innovation for the company. Obviously, I think about innovation an awful lot. When do you really have to innovate, and when are you innovating for novelty as opposed to true differentiation, like true differently solving?
I'm just so interested too that you've been able to begin to define these terms and what they mean to you as well. I think people throw these terms around really loosely, even the word design as well, because it is such a broad term, but who it applies to, what it's designing, who you're designing for, the necessity of it is really so crucial. And it's really part of our education background too. It's something that should always be prevalent, from start to finish, no matter what scenario you're working within and on. So it's really nice to hear reassurance.
Yeah, and another sort of the thread of what you were just asking about, sort of how it evolved over years.
Yeah.
We have actually 10 tenets that describe what a Herman Miller design is, which is pretty fascinating actually. And we have always, always is a long time, for many decades, we've always had something that speaks to what we believe design is.
Yeah.
And that's helped guide people in our company to know what it means. And the tenets that I talk about, the reason we have them written down is at one point, we would often, those of us that have been around a while would say, well, that's not really a Herman Miller design, or that just doesn't quite make it. And other people would say, well, what does that mean, a Herman Miller design? Like, I get, it's like beauty, you know it when you see it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We actually wrote these tenets to help give language to describe if we think it's not, use this language to help describe why it's not a Herman Miller design. And it was very helpful. Yeah. When we wrote it, we actually did it at a time when our new creative head of creative came into the company, Ben Watson, who leads who is the chief creative director for the company. When he came on board about 11 years ago, our then CEO gave a task to several of us to get together to do that work. And the way we did it, we went back and looked at everything that had ever been written about design for us. I mean, everything of importance that we had written and codified, and sat down and came up with those 10 tenets. And they weren't very far off. They were new language, but it was really the thread of what we'd always said.
That's impressive. And that's also a cherishing thing about Herman Miller too, is exactly what you've said. You know it and you see it as well. And maybe that's closer to you who've been a part of the company for so long as well. But many companies who even if still carries a similar age and production are still trying to find that voice and sometimes have to reorient themselves in order to keep up with the market. And so that you have that always impressionable impact of Herman Miller, I think that says something really strong about the company.
I think it's really important for any company that's interested in design to be able to describe what it means for them. Like, what is design, and then how do you know that it's a product or a service or whatever it is you're designing? Does it actually align with what you believe as a company and what your customer wants, obviously? But it's not at what your customer wants at the expense of
your values.
Your values, yeah.
So I have to ask, I believe I had seen that you were on your route to retire possibly, but you've become so interested in the current project that you're working on. Would you mind starting off to explain that and where you are now?
Okay. I don't hesitate to tell people how old I am. I turned 70 this spring. And so last year I said, okay, it really is time. I loved my work. And my husband actually joked and said that when people ask for about 8 years, I had been saying I was going to retire within 2 years. And always there was something that got my curiosity, something that was exciting enough to work on. So last year I decided, okay, this is it. We don't live forever. And by postponing retirement, it didn't mean I still had like another 20 years. So I was going to retire, but at the time, the chief creative director, Ben Watson, and our CEO, Andy Owen, asked me if there were some projects, if I would stay on, if there were projects that were of interest to me. We're going through a transition of leadership in the company, et cetera. And so there's some value for my longevity to stay and do it.
Yeah.
One of the projects in particular, well, they're two related projects, but one in particular was our real recognition that we needed greater diversity in the design field, which has always been a passion for me, both the design part and the notion of diversity. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about the diversity of gender diversity because it was important to me. It was important to me because of the time that I came into business, et cetera. It's an important aspect. But particular last year, when we started to take a look at when the Black Lives Matter conversations were happening, one of the big narratives were, where are all the Black designers? Which got us looking at, we use outside industrial designers all the time. We use outside graphic designers. We have some internal, but mostly external. I have for 30 some years always said that's what gives us our strength. It's because we look for the diversity of thought that we get by going to outside designers. But having said that, I realized that the diversity of thought didn't necessarily go as broad as it needed to, because the way designers find us is because they know us. They've gone to schools that have identified us. They can kind of reach us being Herman Miller, and we go to the same places to find it. And although we were globally diverse, we found designers from all over the world. They were more like us than not. So we look to say, how do we find where are a greater diversity, certainly people of color and particularly Black. We knew that if we as a company, Herman Miller, attacked that problem, we could affect it a little, very little, because we just don't, again, we're big, but we're not that big. We don't change the world. So we actually approached and looked at and thought about what other companies are interested in design enough to partner with us outside of our normal business. How can we look at design differently to make sure things are happening? And what drove us to that was when we looked at the numbers, if roughly 12% of the American work population identifies as being Black, and then we look at any kind of design education, so interior design, industrial design, whatever it is, when you look at those numbers, the numbers turn out to be like 7.5% of students identify as Black. And then if you look at people practicing in any form of design, landscape design, industrial design, it's about 4.9%. So the pool that we were drawing from already was small. So the idea and the work that I'm doing is to look and see, how do we actually gain momentum, gather together and add and change the pathways so that young people can be recognized design is a really valuable career. It's not about being, and no, not disparaging anyone. It's not about going to art school and not having a career.
Yeah.
And being a starving artist, way over stereotyped, and I don't mean that. It means that there's a breadth of things that creative people can do. There are viable careers. And then making sure that there are pathways that if you're in those schools studying, are you getting everything you need to have a portfolio ready so that when you go to look for a job, you can get that job? And we as companies, do we know where to go find them? So that's what I'm doing.
That's incredible. The necessity for recognition and diversity is so real. We've actually made similar strides within our university too. So it's nice to see that it's starting to play across the board. Actually, and we actually, this past semester, I just have to applaud my own school for making, we did an exhibit actually through the Architectural Society within our school that promoted Black architects, and being a part of the research team and the promotion in order to graphically represent this entire exhibit that took place within the School of Architecture was also incredibly difficult, because there is still a lack of information and resources, and trying to promote these people that we couldn't even find their names was extremely difficult. But It was just an impressive amount of work the students went through in order to reach that point of we need to really start to appreciate these people in ways that they deserve. And so we put on a school-wide actually presentation in order to exhibit those things. But it's just really nice to see that play across the board within the industry now.
I think we should follow up after this call and have a more in-depth conversation to understand how the work that we're doing connects to that and make sure the channels are open. So
Absolutely.
let's schedule it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so next, I guess I'd like to follow up by asking you a little about women too. So you're a founding um, owner of that as well, nonprofit organization. So I'd just love to hear where you began with that.
I'm a founding member of an organization called Women in America. We are 11 years, we've been in existence for 11 years. And the premise of the organization was really a group of women, roughly my seniority and more, CEOs and C-suite women who had been in business for a long time, recognizing that each of us had our own stories of what it took to get where we were, decided that there was still a need to help younger women who were looking like they were heading to the C-suites in their companies or in their careers, that they really, women who were very serious about their future and about wanting leadership roles. We decided that we could come together and help those women because there were still issues to deal with and talk about, that sometimes there are not enough women mentors within a company that you have someone to go to see a model. And sometimes there are topics that there's just an advantage to talking outside. So what Women in America is about is having a whole group of mentors that help mentees that are looking for growth. And it's to help kickstart a natural network of mentees. So women to know each other in different industries, progressing in their career in a different way. Again, because many of us closer to my age did not have that and did not have the advantage of what it's needed. Many people argue and say, well, it doesn't need to be a women's only group. Why isn't it sort of cross-discipline? I think it needs to be I think there's still a need for a women's only group because there are issues that women need to talk through in terms of what their difference is, just like there will be and are issues that are unique to race that only those that are experiencing it can actually have the conversation with each other. Not that you don't need allies. We certainly do. We need to sort of come together. But there are times when just that singularity of focus is important. And so the Women in America organization has been wonderful. We've had some wonderful successes of women who have sort of, now that it's 11 years old, that 10 years ago were part of the group and have really gone on to do great things with their career. And it's always lovely to hear back where they say what the organization helped them think to do. Not that the organization was the sole reason, but certainly contribute to helping them thinking through. Sometimes it's just being that giving that push, right? Giving that push that you can do this.
Encouragement and support goes a long way. And I think that level of empathy that you just mentioned between women to women is just extremely important.
So thanks for noting. It's a lovely, it's mostly, right now it's mostly centered in the tri-state area in New York because that's where most of the women were from. I was the odd one from Michigan as a mentor, but that's what it's about.
That's incredible. It's really nice to hear. We also carry similar organizations at the school as well. We try to, Women in Architecture and Design is kind of a thing that continues to kind of uplift women within the design field that are also underappreciated in some sense and undervoiced, I think, is a big part of that reason. And beginning to show that within leadership is crucial. But I do want to ask, as we come closer to a conclusion, just about your future and what you kind of hope to leave with the company. I know you've left the mark in terms of the allowance of your longevity and being able to apply so many different aspects through your backing and education. But what do you hope to leave with Herman Miller? And is it going to be a sad farewell by that time?
That's an interesting question. Obviously, I couldn't quite retire when I was supposed to retire. I've kept on. I think I haven't given it much thought about what I will leave, but that's an interesting question. I hope what I leave with, I hope if there's anything, it is about leadership and what it means to be what I hope has been a good style of leadership. I actually have, over the years, particularly for women's groups, have often been asked about style of leadership, etc. And I have written some, I have captured some lessons learned. And one of the lessons that I always talk about is to not take yourself too seriously, but to take your work very seriously. And I think that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to be incredibly serious about my work. I'm passionate about the work. I'm devoted to it. But I don't necessarily take myself too seriously in that, because I am more than my work. And so I don't know if that sums it up. Absolutely. My number one lesson, by the way, is I've already said it, and that is be curious. So I hope that if and not that they'll necessarily be remembered, but I hope what people do is stay curious about what our brand is. I have loved the fact that we are always curious about what the new thing has to be. Again, by the new thing being what problem needs to be solved, that we have the grit to try and solve. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. I'll give it some thought, though.
Yeah, that was absolutely perfect. And I think I did want to conclude by asking you, what kind of advice would you give to students or someone of my age within their field who maybe is unsure of their pathway as well? And I think that probably goes hand in hand with it. But if you'd like to try to tackle that question, I'd love to hear.
At the risk of being absolutely redundant, stay curious. When a job prospect is in front of you, look at it. I know that the first couple steps are, I need to get a job that pays money. We all have to be there. We know that. I've got children in their 30s. I know the importance of what that first job is. But make sure you look that it's the right job for you, not the right job for somebody else or what someone else stated, but something that you actually every morning will get up and be excited about doing. And when it's not exciting, when it's not fun, be astute enough to move on to the next role. Right? Because a company really survives well when individual people are really happy about what they're doing, and same with the person. So always know that. And there'll be jobs that either you won't really like and want to leave, and there will be jobs that the company, it might not be the right fit. Know the difference between just not doing good work and it not being the right work. Mostly it's usually not the right work or the right company. So that's my advice. Just don't be too hard on yourself, but be really critical about what it is you're doing. And never stay too long either. Never stay too long in a place that you're not growing or learning or excited about.
Yeah, be thrilled to continue to proceed. Yeah.
And there's, especially coming out in the fields that you're coming out in design, there's just a world of opportunity. There are so many places that the ability to think as a designer has so much relevance to so many other fields.
Yeah, it's never ending. And I still continue to learn about the possibilities every time I have one of these interviews. And I don't even know how many interviews I am deep within their show in general, maybe 20 or something. So, but it's always more unique every time to learn about the possibilities and where you can feel really passionate about your career too. And I've never once talked to someone of a successful background who isn't super passionate about the things that they're doing day in, day out. And so that's something that I strive to always feel when I actually work within the field more closely. But thank you so much, Mary, for taking the time for your day. I know we're all busy in terms of this, but it was such a pleasure to talk to you.
It's delightful to talk to you. And as I said, we really do need to circle back. So thank you. Absolutely. Good luck to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of A Student's Perspective. You can tune in next week as well when the conversation continues.